meeting of September 22nd, 2021. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. The first item on our agenda is public participation, and not seeing any folks here from the public. Is there anyone online who would like to do public participation? Not seeing any. We will move on. I'm going to take a couple of things out of order. The OPEB discussion, which is on the agenda for tonight, was delayed to a future meeting. So we will start with the financial articles, and we will start with the DPW and Rec. So that would be Doug and Sonia.
So, well, I guess the first one of ours is Article 3. That's a second reading. We didn't meet with Brendan again because we talked about it last spring.
Okay.
So it's just accepting the money. We always accept the money and.
Generally, we like to accept the money, and the subcommittee vote from the last meeting was 2-0.
2-0,
so.
right.
Any discussion about accepting money?
Mr. Chairman, motion to approve.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, Dave and Doug. All those in favor?
Aye.
Mike? Okay.
Requiring roll call.
I think we need to do roll call, actually. Do you know if that's for the entire, for everyone, or just for?
I would assume just the online one.
Is he
Take it as a
Okay.
whole.
Yeah.
just those online?
Okay, so just to make this official, I need to do a roll call for those who are online. Mike?
Present.
No, I mean for the accepting the money, or will of Marshall Simons.
Oh, right, okay, yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Brad?
Yes.
And that's 9-0. Okay, so the next one would be Article 5.
Article 5 is an article for $4 million for the purpose of reconstructing the force main at Francis Rahman Pump Station. It's
Thanks.
that particular pump station needs some work, and it's time to reconstruct it. We talked about it in, is it January?
For May.
At May town meeting for the design.
Before town meeting.
Right. And so they're coming to us to fund the construction of a new force main. With that, subcommittee voted 2-0. John Sanchez is here to answer questions.
Hi, John.
So Tom Hayes is actually present to answer any questions. We spoke about this pump station in the spring. We pulled the article from town meeting. And the hope was that between then and now, we would have perhaps had some funding from the feds as all these other monies may be coming into place. And we have nothing concrete yet. I know the state has a bunch of billions of dollars that they have not sent down to us, and maybe, and I think you probably touched on that in your report later. We are using some funds for the design of a different project, but as far as the major construction projects, we don't have anything allocated yet. But we need to move forward with the station. We delayed it already. Construction is design is pretty much completed. We went through conservation, and we'd like to go out to bid soon to repair or replace the force main as well as upgrade the pump station on Francis Wyman. And just a quick update, the goal is to move the force main from where it is right now in wetlands and behind backyards and actually put it on Francis Wyman Road, which is accessible. Due to the fact that we have had a couple of breaks on that force main, we'd like it, if it ever happen again, it'll be easier if it's actually on the road and not in somebody's backyard.
Well said, David.
Again, Tom is here to answer any specific questions you may have.
Thanks, John. Any questions?
I have two, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Phil.
Thank you. We had talked just briefly about bundling all of the pump station repairs and bonding it. Is Has there been any further discussion about that?
That was, I believe, a different article that we had talked about as far as the regular maintenance that we do, as opposed to actual stations.
Okay, and secondly, on that line, it's uphill, right? Quite a bit uphill, down Francis Wyman. Do you recommend that the residents should have backflow preventers?
No, because we're talking about the force main per se. So under the new design, we're not gonna have anybody connected to the force main itself.
Okay.
Force main is under pressure.
Right.
So the gravity lines that we already have in place, they go by gravity and they feed into the station.
Okay,
So-
thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Phil. Seeing no further questions, the chair will entertain a motion.
Motion to approve?
Thanks, John.
Second.
Thanks, Sonia. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so that's 7-0 here. Mike?
Aye.
Rob?
Yes.
And then Brad?
Yes.
Okay, so that passes 10-0. Thank you. So then Article 6.
So I really am going to let John talk about this one because it's pretty detailed. This is an unexpected new project that's come up that I will give them credit because they jumped on this problem very quickly. It has not been long since we found out that we had a problem with these microplastics in Mill Pond and in Vinebrook. And so they very quickly moved toward coming up with a solution and getting the engineering started. And so
by now, I think everybody has heard about PFAS. I mean, we've sent mail-ins, website, everything we've done to let people know what the problem may be. Plus, all the other many communities around the Commonwealth, they have the similar problem. So what we did in order to expedite a solution to the Mill Pond treatment plant, which is the plant that we intend to maintain once that we connect to the authority, we've been going like in a parallel way to get permits, approvals as we're doing design, and actually ordering parts for the new facility. So through the ARPA, I believe it's ARPA funding, we funded the design so we could get going immediately on it after we did an RFP and selected an engineer. And right now, we're in the process of putting several packages out to bid, independent packages. One will be to actually buy the filters because the lead time is 8 to 10 months out. So another package will be to do pipe work at the facility that we can only do during low demand in the winter months. So again, if we don't do that this coming winter, we'll miss a whole year. We have a third package to buy some pumps and oil equipment. And we're thinking even about a fourth package to maybe even do pre-excavation of the areas where we need to build the facility, also to expedite completion of the project. Typically, a project like this will take like 2.5 years to complete if you go the traditional way. Again, we're trying to compress everything into about a year, year and a half. DEP is helping us with the review process. I have to give them credit. Obviously, they created the problem to us by changing the MCL, but at the same time, they've been very fast. They've been working on giving us approvals for the different aspects of the design as we go along. So with that, if we are approved for this funding, we will start ordering parts in the next, pretty much the next month or so. The good news, if there are any, is that we were approved for SRF financing for this project. So there's been a lot of paperwork that we needed to do that. But if there are any funds available from the feds or the state, which we hope that it will be under the infrastructure package or even under the money that the state has right now, this is typically the way that cities and towns get money from the state is through the SRF financing. And in the last time around, there was some principal deferral that cities and towns didn't have to pay, principal forgiveness. So hopefully, if there is any of that, we'll be able to capture some money back by doing it through that process.
What does SRF stand for?
It's a revolving fund, state revolving fund. I think that's what it's called, as a matter of fact. And typically, it's just to get loans through the state to do water and sewer projects. But the rate at which they have lending money is really, we can borrow at the same rate. So for us, it hasn't been beneficial to actually do any projects under the SRF. Although I want to say that the Mill Pond original was SRF, way back, like 10 years, 15 years ago. But this one, we're doing it for that reason. Because if there's any benefit, either 0% financing or principal forgiveness, we want to be pre-approved on that. So that's all I have.
I would say the other thing we were impressed with is it's a fairly large building, and they are engineering it to anticipate future needs for possible other filtration systems as the state finds other things that they're going to regulate. So some of the engineering is also done to hopefully capture some of the things that we expect may come along sooner. And then there is going to be space in this building that will be built to house other filters if we need to do that in the future.
Yes, thank you. Forgot to mention that.
Where is the building actually going to be physically located? Is it right next to the station?
So if you're facing the mill pond, to the right of the mill pond, there is a small building that houses the generator and the fluoride building. It'll be behind that. That's probably going into the hill, because there's not a lot of space there. On the ground, there's pipes everywhere, but so we have to stay away from that. We'll cut into the hill and build it back there.
It's a fairly large building, 50 by 100 by
Yes.
30 tall.
Yeah, and it's going to be tall because the filters are very, very tall.
This is uphill, right by the reservoir, you're saying?
No, it'll be behind the existing building.
The
and
current
then we'll
plant,
cut
okay.
the hill to,
Got it, okay.
so it wouldn't go past the height of the
It's not
dam.
going to be higher than the
No,
dam.
not the
Okay.
dam, no.
Phil?
Isn't the hill the dam?
Not that hill, we're not gonna cut into that one. Cut into the one on the right, natural ground, yeah.
No,
But you're correct, the back hill, it is the dam.
that'd be a big mistake.
Yeah, that would be bad. Frank and then John.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, that is Woburn,
I
so.
need to get to this thing.
Hey, Dave.
Yeah, that's okay, I can, whoops. Everything's hard. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I wanted to know is, relative to the Water Resources District, the MWRA, do they already comply? Do they already comply with this PFAS requirement?
Yes,
Did they have to do anything in order to be compliant?
they don't have to do anything because their levels are non-detect at this point. Their source, being the Quabbin Reservoir, is pristine and it does not have any of those PFAS.
So as I've said before, one of the things that worries me about the upgrade to Mill Pond, or doing anything to Mill Pond, is that at some point, it seems to me, because the source of the water is, it's both limited, the impoundment's limited, the water is not the best water in the world coming in. It's coming off of a watershed that's got all kinds of stuff along the route. How convinced are we that over time that Mill Pond just doesn't turn out to be, if not the same cost, more expensive than to generate MWRA equivalent amounts of water for our use? So I know we want redundancy, and I understand that. I guess everybody has to put their own judgment to how much you trust the MWRA to let us run out of water. But what makes us so convinced that over 10 or 15 years, the cost of just running the plant and upgrading the plant and the quality of the water that we need to get out of it doesn't turn out to be as, if not more expensive?
So there's so many chemicals that are not tested right now for, okay? So I don't have a crystal ball to predict, like in 10 years, there wouldn't be something else that we need to treat for. So what we're doing right now, Frank, is we're looking at two things. One is the problems that we have right now and the ones that we expect. So we're looking related to PFAS and PFOS, which are the ones that are regulated right now. We're looking at more of those chemicals because there are thousands of them, but we're looking at what all the states are regulating, and we're gonna test for those to make sure that what we are building take care of maybe a larger set of chemicals that are not regulated right now, and leaving a space in the facility in case that we need to do some other treatment process. At the same time, and putting aside redundancy, which is a big thing for us, and I think it should be. Unfortunately, to the authority, and I think there's a great system they have, but we are the last town in their line. So if we were Belmont, Arlington, some of the towns within Boston, if something were to happen to any of the lines, well, you're surrounded by end-of-the lines that can feed the town. In our case, being the last town, if we were fully dependent on that line, then we're dependent on a single point of break, which I don't think that will be beneficial to the town. Having said that too, there's also an economic factor to it. We still owe, I think the bond is still up for 5 more years. I don't know, I think I checked the other day, it's 5 more years that we still have to make payments on the mill bond. And there is a cost differential too on how much we can treat water for versus the one that we will buy from the authority. Savings are close to $1 million a year by having the hybrid system than by just buying water from the authority.
So we've actually calculated out our fully burdened costs versus an MWRA million-gallon cost?
That has been part of, ever since 2018, when we went and did the analysis for whether or not to join the authority, that has been part of it too, the full cost of us producing water versus what it costs to actually buy it. That has been part of the analysis. So we have those costs, and we're still, by producing our water, is still more economical to do it that way. Plus giving us the flexibility of having redundancy as well.
Okay, thank you.
Well, and then there was, I mean, the other thing is, with the MWRA connection that we're talking about phase 2 again tonight, but it'll be another couple of years before that's finished. That gives us enough capacity, that gives us enough water in the winter, but that doesn't cover, we don't have enough capacity in the current MWRA plan and the pipes that we're putting in the ground.
So in the long term.
So we would have to do another connection, is that true?
That's correct. So if I may, Mr. Chairman, so
Absolutely.
if you recall the 2 phases that we had for the end-of-the connection, and we already completed phase 1, and we've been taking water since April continuously because of the PFAS problem. Phase 2 is the one that was going to get us all the way to 6.5 million gallons a day. And if you recall, we call it phase 2A to be able to expedite a part of it, which is what we are actually hopefully start constructing in 2022. We actually have bids and we're awarding the contract. So that 2A project will give us about 3.5 million gallons a day, which will not carry us, if it was just the only source, will not carry us through the summer. So to finish the project, which is still, it's part of the same 26 million, nothing has changed, but to finish the project, we need the last phase, which, again, if you look at the plan and how we told town meeting how we're gonna do this, is a few years out, because the way we fund it is through raising the water rates at a very small pace. So the only reason we expedited even what we're doing right now is because we've been successful at a couple of things. One, we got some grants from MassWorks. 2, we also got a commitment from the Noble Company to help us with the cost of the project. And by doing those things, we're able to actually do what we're doing right now. We wouldn't be doing even phase 2A right now if it wasn't for those influxes of money that we had. So the last phase is many years out still.
So even so, I am thinking long-term. What you're saying is even when all of the capacity that we intend to build at all to source from MWRA, that would still be insufficient to feed Burlington?
No, what I'm saying is what we're doing right now in
Would be.
2022
Right.
will be insufficient.
What about when we get to the rest of it, though?
Then we'll be complete at that point.
And the capacity of that, do you foresee to be enough that if we just didn't use Mill Pond, we would still have plenty of capacity?
Correct. So that capacity will be 6.5 million gallons a day, which is the absolute max that we are looking 20 years out for the
Okay.
town during
So
the hot days.
that's what I thought. So,
But I have to add one thing to that, Frank, all right, if you don't mind. That involves us doing projects and also the MWRA doing projects, which they have those phased in into their plan. They expedited part of the project, so during 2022, they're gonna be actually building a third of the length of pipe that we would have had to build otherwise. And then they're gonna have to do additional projects to actually backfeed, they call them the meters, because that's how they connect the meters, 3 meters to provide that capacity. Now, they have all of them in the book, they have all of them in the capital plan, but all those things will need to happen before we can get 6.5 million gallons out of that pipe.
So something like between 5 and 10 years out.
I'm hoping less than that, to be
So
honest.
say 5, but we
Yeah.
could retire Mill Pond at that point if we wanted to.
If the town decided that does wanna go, full MWRA, yeah, the capacity will be there.
Yeah, okay. It's just that I'm fearful that in the end, Mill Pond is small enough and the source is compromised enough that over the long run, treatment for that area will eventually outrun what it would cost to take care of, to get the economy of scale of the MWRA. So I'd like to not be locked in to not being able to shut down Mill Pond by all the groundwork we're doing with MWRA. And it sounds like that is the case, although it's not our intent.
So when we did this project in 18, I mean, one thing that we wanted to make sure of is that we're gonna build this pipe, we're gonna build it once. So when we went through the process, which it took us like 2 years of permitting, through the Water Resources Commission, that's why we got it approved for the full amount.
Right.
So if you look at the approval, it will say 6.5 million gallons, even though we're gonna take a little less in the beginning. Because the process is expensive and long, and we're just gonna, and then the pipe that we're gonna put in the ground is gonna be the big pipe, the one that we,
Can I drive my car down? It is big, I know it's big.
well, it's 24 inch, which is pretty large. I mean, we don't have any other 24 inches in town.
Okay.
So, yeah, so it was designed and permitted to be able to carry 100% of the needs of the town.
Thank you.
So I have John and then Mike on the call, and then Phil. So go ahead, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, you had mentioned something, I'm not sure I quite heard. You'd mentioned how much we're saving per year operating Mill Pond versus all the MWRA. What was that number?
So it's close to, our assumption is that when we are able to take all the water we need per the plan, we'll do about 2/3 of the water from the Mill Pond and 1/3 from the authority. And the savings of running those 2/3 in-house is close to $1 million per year.
Okay. And is that just operation costs, or is that including debt service?
Debt service, cost of personnel.
That's the all-in
time,
cost. Okay.
All of it.
Okay.
Even
So that-
including the overhead as well, not just the personnel plus the overhead.
Okay, good. And with the PFAS levels, is there a time limit when we need to meet that requirement of 20?
Yes, it's like 2 months ago.
Okay, we're past it, all right. So we're basically,
We're in violation right now,
all right,
and we get a violation letter.
So is everybody else.
Yes, we get a violation letter every 3 months when we do the quarterly report.
and we're trying to mitigate that basically by diluting with the MWRA water.
Correct.
Okay, and what is the number for Vine Brook and Mill Pond right now?
They are very similar. They're between 40 and 50 parts per trillion.
They're both about the same?
Yeah.
All right. And that was passing originally because there was no limit, or we were using a higher requirement at the time?
Both. The limit used to be much higher because the method that we had to test for it was not able to go any lower. So for us, it used to be non-detect. The last time we tested with the old method, it was non-detect. The new method, it's much more precise, I suppose. So now it's 20, and then we don't need it.
Okay. And you mentioned that you were looking at other chemicals that other states are regulating, but Massachusetts isn't currently. Have we actually measured for those other chemicals yet, or?
We have a whole list of them right now. When we test for they call it PFAS 6 because we happen to say it's only 6 of them. We test for a bunch of other ones as well.
So if we did have the rules that other states had, would we be in compliance with those?
And that's what we're gonna make sure of, that this filters will
Wait,
do.
so this filter will cover all those, so will there, here's what I'm building up to. Is there any state that's regulating something that we would not pass if that regulation was added to Massachusetts? after adding this filter?
Well, we will know, we're doing a pilot testing to test just that.
Well, assuming the PFAS filter works properly, are there non-PFAS chemicals that are, on the list somewhere else?
Oh, no,
that-
so, I'm sorry, it was specific to PFAS and PFOS. I wasn't talking about like, when I said this filters and what OSS are regulating, we're talking about PFAS and PFOS specifically.
Okay, I'm just drilling down a little bit on where Frank was headed. If there's, chemical X that, is regulated in some other state, but Massachusetts, are there other chemicals that other states are regulating that Massachusetts is not, I guess is the question. And do we have any sense of where we stand on those?
I can't give you the answer.
All right, You don't know of any in particular,
Well,
though,
it's
at least,
a
or-
vast, it's a vast country with many regulations with, I can't say that Ohio wouldn't have something that, I don't know all the rules for all the states.
Okay, there's not some national
Well,
water
there is.
regulators
There
conference
is.
that lists these, or?
There is, it's called the EPA, and what the EPA does is, they do what is called UCMR, unregulated contaminants rule, all right? So every so many years, they go throughout the country, and they come with a list of chemicals that they want us to test for. And then based on that, they come up with regulations on what you need to meet. Fortunately or unfortunately, whichever way you want to call it, the EPA has not regulated PFAS, which is why Massachusetts and New York and other states came up with their own rules. But yeah, the nationwide one is the EPA. And we're always looking at that list of what they regulate.
So, are there any interesting ones on that list that are likely to be a whammy in the future, I guess is the question.
Yeah, we already went through the last round, and obviously 1,4-dioxane was one of them that is on that list.
What is it again?
1,4-dioxane,
Oh, yeah.
which is, hence that's why we're abandoning the Vineberg treatment plant. That's the one that caught our eye that we didn't meet. But there's gonna be a new round coming up, and they are gonna make us test for PFAS under the new round. Hopefully by then we'll have this in place. It takes them like 2 to 3 years to actually come up with a new rule after they test the entire country. So,
Okay.
so they move at a different pace than states.
All right, so we're rolling the dice a little bit, but we don't know of any obvious problems coming down the pike at
Correct.
least, so,
Correct.
all right, thank you.
Just building capacity in case we hit something. Mike?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi, John. The source of the water that, can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, good. So the source for the water that goes into the mill pond, I know I've seen a pipe that gets opened occasionally. Is that coming from like the Concord River, or what are the sources of the water that fill up mill pond?
So 99% of the water to the reservoir comes from the Shoshine River. That's the source.
Okay.
And important to know about it, we are very regulated on when we can take water, which it has to be a certain flow. So we wait until we have that flow before we actually pull water from it. But yeah, 99% of it is from there. It's very little that gets filled by rain. The majority is through the pump.
Okay, so the water, presumably, I'm not sure, but the water coming from the Shawshene River is contaminated.
Oh, we know. We tested the source, and that's correct. We tested right at the intake because we were
All right.
trying to determine where the contamination was. So we know it's contaminated at the source.
And are there other communities that also get water from the Shawshene River, like from that same spot?
So Bedford has wells adjacent to it's a brook at that point, and their wells are contaminated by PFAS as well.
I'm just, I guess what I'm wondering is if we're solving a problem for our community that other communities are going to have to solve too, and if there was a better way to do it with a single filtration system that benefited multiple communities, or does that not make sense?
Yeah, the way we run our systems, and this is by design, again, by permit, every city and town has their own permit and runs their independent system. We can't even open a tap to any town, or the other towns can open a tap without first declaring an emergency. That has to be approved by DEP before we can open. So it's a complicated process. That's why it took us year and a half to get the approval to take water from the Quabbin through the MWRA to bring it to Burlington. Because they, for whatever reason, the way the state sees it is that's individual water resources for individual treatment facilities. So, other than the authority, I suppose, it'll be complicated to do another regional approach. I mean,
Okay.
in the MWRA.
Okay, all right. Thanks.
Bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wasn't in Frank's camp originally on this idea of reviewing the cost analysis comparison between the two, but there's a couple of things that, after reading the material that you sent me relative to PFAS, this is basically an arbitrary decision by the state. I mean, the EPA is 70 parts per trillion, I believe, and we're going down to 20 parts per trillion. I mean, there hasn't been that many seconds since the birth of Christ. I mean, it's just so small and an infinitesimal amount of material. So I would like to see the analysis of 10 years comparing going to full MWRA versus Mill Pond. And I have a couple of reasons for that. First of all, that it's likely that they'll come down with more arbitrary decisions relative to these levels. And secondly, as you're well familiar, both the Vine Brook and the Shawsheen have a rather dubious history as it relates to contaminants. I mean, the Vine Brook goes directly through the Great Meadow, which we know has volatile organic compounds, the dioxane, and any number of other things that have been transpired from construction and various manufacturing methods up in Northwest Park, as well as on the south side. And then added to that, the transit that it makes down through the Bedford aquifer into the Shawsheen, which, we have although it's downstream of our intake, Roy Brothers has been cleaning out their chemical tanks there for the last, 50 years? I would really like to see whether or not it's that much more expensive to abandon the construction and the filtration and go MWRA and rely on a pristine source versus one that has the history that our source has. So, I don't know how much work you've already done, but I'd like to see the numbers. I don't know about you, Frank. If it's an extra $1 million a year to have perfectly clean water, and eliminate the overhead and the potential for additional capital improvements at Mill Pond, then I'd like to see whether or not that makes sense. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Sanchez.
Thanks, Bill. Doug?
So a couple of things. One, what would happen to us if we reversed and decided, no, we're not going to build this filter? From a regulatory standpoint, we're not in compliance now, but for how many years? What happens if, because now we are talking about it's years down the road, if everything works, before we would have enough water to operate in the summer. So that's one. And then two, what kind of project could we be looking at though we would lose money on this 15 million, I'm sure, but what could we be looking at to figure out a redundancy? Because I do think that's important. I think, was it 2010 that the big water main broke for MWRA?
Yeah.
Had we been on MWRA, we would have been out of water for a period of time. And so that's, it does seem like we should have, if we can have redundancy. So what would have to happen?
So I don't really have an answer to that one. That I would have to actually sit down and go over it in.
Right, so that could be a long-term planning.
And again, saying it again, based on, say that all of a sudden, like, our redundancy, we'll get it through Bill Rickard, just to say an example. That means that we start the Water Resources Commission process again.
Yeah.
2 years years later, they may or may not approve us to have that as our redundant, and, you know, so that's number one. Now, in the meantime, because we do have a PFAS problem, and I doubt that DEP will issue fines to cities and towns that they're trying to fix the problem. But what will certainly happen, like no doubt that will happen, is that we will have a permanent water ban. That's at the very least, which is not very popular in this town, but
Well, the grass isn't going
Right.
to suffer from PFAS.
Right.
You know,
Well, we're not going to notice if it does.
but that's what will happen, you know, because if we're able to manage a lesser amount of flow for the next 5 years until we build the next phases, then it'll be okay. You're not going to use only sufficient water to manage that, and you're not going to use any other water source. You know, and that's just small things. I mean, to some people, I mean, I don't water my lawn, so it doesn't. Like, I'm just saying, like.
Right, it's not, I don't know what it does to values.
If we continue to, if we don't remediate the PFAS issue, what are the potential fines that we would be carrying if we?
So like I said, as long as you are moving towards a solution, the state is
there's no
not going to
fine?
issue a fine.
Okay.
I got an extension to, I think it's the end of November. I have to check to submit a long-term plan to the DEP, because as part of the notice of non-compliance that we already have, we are required to say how we're going to fix the problem. Now, knowing, because they're helping us with the funding and everything else, knowing that we're moving forward towards a solution, they give us an extension to actually respond to the plan. Because everybody knows what works, which is the GAC filters, and that's what we will be proposing. So if the town said, nope, we're not going to do that, we're going to wait and, you know, build another pipe to the authority, and it's going to take us 5 years. And so, again, there's a cost to it. I doubt they will issue fines, but they will issue other things, such as like water bans.
Right.
Yeah, I don't want to put too fine a point on this for the committee or the public. I'm thinking of this more long-term. I actually think it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to stop this $15 million project, but I think it makes a ton of sense to look at our exit strategy for the next 15, for 5 years out. And that all plays into getting the full delivery of MWRA big enough and to have the right, you know, the right policies in place that if we want to make that change, we can. Right now, we actually are not in a very good position to shut down Mill Pond. We're not. We couldn't do it if we wanted to, I don't think, at this point, right?
We physically can't, no, right,
Can't
no
do
today,
it.
no yet.
So, and not only is there debt on the thing, but there's all sorts of issues. So this is a longer-term problem, but it's not 20 years. It's in the 5 to 10 range, and I'd just like to get more of that homework available. You've probably done it, John, so it's not fair for us to imply that you don't know what the fully loaded costs are. You probably have a good handle on it, but it would be good to share that, and it would be good to think of this in terms of the next one. And one other thing that's tied into this, correct me if I'm wrong, but this contamination that's being removed, is it particulate or is it in solution chemicals? In other words, is it dissolved or is it particulate?
Well, it's currently dissolved in the water, in the only way that they have, the more effective way that they have found, the most effective is through adsorption. So through the GAC, the long and short chains of the PFAS will adhere to.
So is that what
the
these
carbon.
filters will do? They're actually absorption filters?
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, not add with a B, but with a D, adsorption.
Okay.
To
All right.
charcoal? Is that what
Yes.
we're talking about?
Yeah,
Charcoal
so-
filters, $15 million. Well, the building.
It's the building.
Right.
Well, actually, it's not that much money for the amount of water you're putting through this thing and what it's got to do. I'm surprised it isn't more. But there are lots of contaminants that are a lot harder to get out that are just as bad, if not worse, like the dioxane. I mean, that's really deadly stuff. So I think we need to keep our eyes open for, assuming that source of water gets worse, not better, the Shawsheen, and I believe it will, and assuming that it is tapped out, it's limited, and it is, it's very limited, if nothing else, by the size of Mill Pond. At some point, we may very well want to use an exit strategy, and maybe the redundancy is something we haven't even thought about yet if we really need it, but it could be a sharing of plumbing and water in the immediate area, like Billerica, Lexington, a better sharing thing. There's got to be a way that we could survive a shutdown for a week of the main pipe and not be in no water. So we have to figure that out.
So,
I don't know that answer, but I gotta believe there's a way.
I think it's a valid point, Frank, that I think the town will need to look in the future to see what everything else is going down the pike and whether or not, this facility will be good like forever. But I will tell you that the surrounding towns do not have the capacity to carry us. And that I know today, because most of them are already MWRA, so if there's a problem with the MWRA, hence there's a problem with them.
It would be emergency aid. It would get you through fire and safety.
No, but hold on a second, and then, because it's important, Billerica is the only one that is not. And from them, and we test our connection, the emergency connection with them, we do it once a year, we can get 1 million gallons a day by using pumps, which Billerica has, and that's how we test them. So, which is great, it's 1 million gallons, except that our average is 3 million. Our winter use is 2.5 million gallons a day. So if we had 1 million gallons, we can't go for a week. Nothing will carry us.
Well, it'd be an emergency situation. There'd be severe constraints on consumption. There'd have to be until it gets fixed. But the MWRA has to, I don't know, I'm speculating. All I'm saying is I'm suspicious of Mill Pond in the long term, both in terms of cost and quality. And so I'd just like to have an exit strategy in the 5-year window if we needed it.
That was a point well taken.
Any further questions?
Mr. Chairman, motion to approve.
Thank you, Sonia. Is there a second? Thank you, Doug. All those in favor?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
And Brad?
Yes.
Thank you. That's 10-0.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Chairman.
And then there's the final Article 9, which is housekeeping one. That's an Phase 2 MWRA water connection.
Right. Article 9, by our understanding, is well, it says here, it's a housekeeping vote. It's a change in wording, which we're not sure what the fine points of the wording are, but we approved this in January, and so we continue to approve.
I have a little bit more context on what the issue is that basically what ended up happening is that when we have the town meeting, it goes out, most of the articles goes out to the AG to get the approval before it becomes law. But because it was a bonding issue, I believe, it had to be approved by the bond council. And because the selectmen didn't vote on the meeting ahead of time, that it was going to be a virtual meeting, they had some concerns that they weren't quite sure whether it was the intent or not behind the 85-15 vote. So basically, they're asking town meeting, because the selectmen have now approved that original meeting was a virtual meeting, and that this meeting will be a virtual meeting. They'll reaffirm the vote.
Is there anything else in that category that we need to reapprove just to get ahead of it, or?
Not according to Betty or Lynn,
Okay.
This is because it's a bond, I believe.
because it's a bond. Yeah, it's a bond issue. So essentially, that's the whole reason. And there wasn't a backup in the original material that was sent out, but Amy did put together, because I did ask her what was going on. So with that, I'll entertain a motion to.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Brad?
Yes.
And Rob?
Aye.
That's 10-0. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for voting for it, because we are signing contracts, I believe, next week.
That'd be a pickle.
We need that approval.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
I'd like to, before you leave, John, I'd like to take this moment to just introduce our new recording clerk, Kayla Noonan. She's sitting back there.
Welcome.
Welcome.
She's been doing our meeting minutes since April 28th, and this is the first time we get to meet her. Get to meet her in person, so welcome. Okay, so I'm going to go with Article 8 first, because I know Jim has been hanging on the line for a while, which is to fund the appellate tax board decision, and then we'll pick up the rest of Town Hall 1 articles, if that's okay with you?
Sure.
Okay.
So Article 8 is to fund the appellate tax board decision. I'm not sure if it's, I don't think it's written in the article, but it's $150,000. So the big picture sense, as you know, we've been battling Macy's for a number of years for a tax abatement that they had filed. The one that's coming through the appellate tax board right now is for the years 14 through 16. We were very firm in our negotiations with them. We felt very firm that there were a lot of items that were not given to us by the corporation, and we've had a very strong history of supporting our tax base and being able to support it. That's both through Jim and Russ. We've not lost many decisions, so we played a hard line and decided to call their bluff, and we took them to court on it. So this has now gone through the appellate court process, and we had a number in mind. Macy's had a number in mind. Basically came out somewhere in the middle, and they have made their decision. I know the administration is not happy with the decision. We feel we had a very strong case and things that were presented, which we spoke about, but the long and the short of it is the appellate court has made the decision. So for the years 14 through 16, we need to give back $246,000 to Macy's Corporation. That will be funded through the town overlay account, which is, again, what we have for these types of decisions. And as you know, over the years, we can declare a surplus, and monies are funded out. But these is money that's held through our tax base to cover potential appellate decisions. So this is one that we did lose. Also, as a portion of that, we owe back interest. So the decision through this warrant, that cannot come out of the overlay account unless the Board of Assessors declares an excess in that account, at which point it can. So as of our discussion with the administration during our subcommittee meeting, that had not been done. So we owe the $150,000 also in the back interest. So this article is for that funding. Macy's is back in court. Each year they get their tax bill and they fill out their abatement forms. So we are going back to court with them for the next 3 years, which is 17 through 20. We feel we have even a much stronger case based upon things that Macy's has done and proposals that they have submitted to the town, and correspondence that have gone back and forth, that we have a very strong case against them, and we'll continue to battle. But for right now, again, the decision was not in the town's favor, but it was somewhere in between. It wasn't in their favor either, but it does mean that we owe some money back to Macy's. So the subcommittee voted 2-0 in favor of supporting this article.
And which source of funding is that going to come from? Stabilization.
Stabilization, which requires a 2/3 vote.
John, was there any additional stuff that you wanted to add on top of that?
No, I think David did a fine job explaining it. It's much calmer than I would have been, or Paul. But if you needed it,
already red in the face.
I don't want it to get any worse, right? But I think both Jim and someone from the board, Kathy O'Neill, the chairman of the board, are here too, so.
Great. John?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I know you guys fought hard on this, Jim. I'm not sure I completely got the numbers straight here. It sounds like the decision was 246K against us.
For back taxes that were paid.
The abatement.
Right, that we need to pay back.
But we also owe interest
And
on
then
that
there's
money.
150K in addition of interest.
Correct.
So somehow they applied 150K in interest on 250K for that period of time.
2014 present,
Okay.
2015 to present, 2016.
We should invest in that fund. All right, all right. Thanks, I understand.
You should be investing in that, yes.
Yes. All right, thank you.
Frank? Or Phil, did you have a question?
No,
Okay.
I have one question for Jim. I mean, there was a bankruptcy there as well. Is there any of our tax money affected by that?
I'm not familiar with any bankruptcy, so I apologize for my ignorance on that. So I would have to defer to Gary on that.
Okay, one other question, Jim, on the comps of the sale of the entire property, did we finally get full information on the sale of the properties? I know Macy's wasn't included, but the rest of that could serve as a comp for the values.
Trying to choose my words carefully. I didn't quite hear who was read, but I've got a little tan from the summer, but if I had my typical Irish pale skin, you'd see how red I am on the outside and the inside. In my opinion, and it's been said, I think Macy's has not been an honorable citizen of this commercial community as it relates to this. And Phil, I think as it relates, if I'm hearing you correct, was related to the acquisition of the old Sears property by Simon, who continues not to file their required reports. And no, to my understanding, unlike most transfers, particularly all the residential people watching, if they were to go back and look at the transfer of that Sears property, they would see there were no deed stamps paid on that, in my opinion. And they have not shared any information regarding that transfer, which, to your point, would have been a phenomenal bump. But it's also my understanding, and I think we'll be hearing more of this as we move through this town meeting and other town meetings. As it relates to this, I just want to mention one point. The reason why Macy's put the town of Burlington in the situation we find ourselves today, prior to, again, in my opinion, their dishonesty in terms of how they approached responding to discovery and production of documents, was the fact that they approached the town with a proposed value they wanted for abatements for the first year of $13 million. So certainly there wasn't much room for compromise when someone doesn't want to come in the ballpark and, again, in my opinion, be an honorable citizen of this community. So we don't have that. We were privy to a very small plan at that time, which laid out in approximately 12 to 16,000 square foot is my recollection, pad site in the parking lot, which would which the plan indicated would have had 3 restaurants. And my understanding of recent is during that time, further, in my opinion, from a former town employee, as they were in testifying at the appellate tax, what it was a 2-day hearing, that the property was undevelopable outside of what was there. The second day of trial, they were sitting with the planning director and staff with a It was relayed to me, it was Stephen Kopp, as I think most of you have heard that name, huge developer. And they were talking about a development on the site. I further understand, secondhand knowledge, that they have been in discussions of recent talking about a mixed-use development akin to Assembly Square Mall, which, based on some of the information I've got secondhand as well, could add, hundreds, if not 1 million square feet of space and hundreds of residential units down there on that site as well. So needless to say, the inside of me is probably redder than a stop sign. But we move on to fight another day. But again, in my opinion, I think the community really needs to come to grips when these type of people operate one way, off camera, not in town meeting, and in my opinion, don't want to pay a fair share of their property taxes that operate this community, but yet want to come and propose these major developments. At the same time, they're alleging the property is almost valueless as it relates to any additional expansion on the site. So sorry for the long-winded answer, but I think you're going to hear more about this. I think I would like to make a recommendation that a lot of these documents be supplied at some point to the community in general, and let reasonable people read the documents and get their own takeaway and see if they share the opinion I have formulated in terms of their honesty and responsiveness, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd reiterate, I mean, it's a little off topic, but whatever we need to spend to defend that case for whatever number of years, based on what he's telling us, I think we need to spend.
Again, this is just for
Back taxes, I
the back taxes, right, but going forward, I understand.
This is for the interest that's due.
Correct. The back taxes are coming from the overlay,
Coming
the
from the
interest
overlay.
is coming from stabilization.
The article is for the interest.
The article is correct, it's the past interest. Just in full disclosure, again, second-hand information. My understanding is, one I was privy to, I was on the phone call where we had a conversation with Macy's of recent that involved members of the administration, a member of my board, myself, and members of the planning board, where one of their representatives made the comment directly, this is a drop in the bucket for you people, referring to the town of Burlington. So I'm not sure the citizens of this town would agree that $400,000 is going back, not even discussing the six-figure figure that we spent with the former town council and outside experts. Further, so everybody's well aware, I think David laid out very accurately, we have future years moving forward, and this comment came to me secondhand from someone in the town who I respect, and I think Representative of Macy's indicated that not only do we think the decision that was made was right, but we intend to kick your ass on the next couple of years. Pardon the French, but I wanted to make sure the quote that was relayed to me was accurate.
Thanks, Jim. Chair will entertain a motion.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Bill.
Second.
Thanks, Sonia. No further discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Mike?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes, we have no choice.
And Brad?
Yes.
11-0. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I could add, before Mr. Doherty signs off, and I know, is it Kathy that's also on there, and members of the administration, we appreciate you backing and defending certain tax dollars for us, Mr. Doherty. We know that that's not an easy fight at times, and while we absolutely appreciate the business community and what they do for us, we also expect to be treated fairly by them. So thank you for your work.
Yeah, thank you, Sonia.
Has been what I found with the majority of the commercial taxpayers in this town.
Thank you, Sonia.
Well said, Sonia. Thank you for your support.
Okay. Moving on, can we take Article 7, the transfer from Affordable Housing Fund next?
Sure. So Article 7 is the transfer from the Affordable Housing Fund for a affordable housing need assessment, and the amount is $30,000. I think everyone was given a handout that we got as well. The subcommittee met with Mike Runyon and Ernie Cavino, along with the administration. They plan on putting together a presentation at town meeting. I'll overview it here, but Mike is here to also talk about the article as well, but not with the formal presentation. Again, this is a request for an independent affordable housing need assessment. You know, we have our affordable housing fund that has roughly $800,000 in it right now. We have a committee, again, that has been assigned to overview and determine our needs and assessments. And we thought, or they thought, that this was, again, the best way to have an independent overview of what's there. Again, the town has met its 10% obligation, so although we're not subject to, 40B regs where developers could come in and kind of overshoot our authorities and do things we don't want, it's still something that, these aren't just 40B projects. There are a lot of other types of needs that we may need in town or to look at in town. Senior housing, multi-unit type housing, not just your singles and two-bedroom units, but higher units. So it's getting a full assessment of what we have in the town now, what our needs may be based upon our population and going forward, and having that done in an independent sense. So again, the fund itself has roughly $800,000 in it. We do have some additional funds that may be coming back with the sale of 117 South Bedford. If you remember, we'll talk about that next, I'm sure. We had a deed restriction on a property on 117 South Bedford, which was in disarray. We basically bought that back through foreclosure and fixed it up, and now that will continue to stay on our subsidized housing stock. But we are going to need to sell it, and so that the next article that we'll talk about is the funding as that product. But again, we have money in this fund, using $30,000 to have an independent review of what's going on with it being funded out of that account to support affordable housing. Just seems like a no-brainer. So the subcommittee voted 2-0 in favor. Again, Mike is here. He may want to talk a little bit more about it.
I think you summed it up fairly nicely, Dave, but I'll be happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
John?
Wouldn't want anything go by without a question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the study sounds, certainly like a reasonable thing to understand what we need and so on. I know there was originally another article about a housing trust. And that's been withdrawn.
Correct.
So I just want to make sure that that you feel that this study is a worthwhile thing to do, independent of whether we decide to have a housing trust or not. Is that the case, or?
Yes, John, absolutely. The town has never conducted a housing needs assessment, a comprehensive housing needs assessment. We have our master plan committee, but typically those are small groups of typically the same folks in town here. We've got a relatively new committee. We've got a lot of new faces on the committee with some interesting backgrounds in affordable housing, finance, real estate, et cetera. We've been very, excuse me, very active over the last 12 months. And understanding what our needs are, we feel is most important to us. The overwhelming majority of units that have come online since the development of the Grandview property have been very narrow-minded in terms of who was going to qualify for these units. They're typically 1- and 2-bedroom apartments at folks at the 80% area median income level. It's leaving huge gaps in town for opportunities for other residents of Burlington. And quite honestly, we're not so sure that these type of proposals, development proposals that we've seen over the last 15 or 20 years are actually paying any dividends to the residents of Burlington, or if they are, in my opinion, that they're relatively small. So anyway, we're hoping that having this assessment and having a document for us to work with going forward, so when the next proposal comes down the line, we'll be in a better position to say, well, you know, wait a minute, according to our research, you know, we'd be better served with this type of housing rather than what you're necessarily proposing here. And then we could sort of negotiate a better position for ourselves going forward. But because I guarantee you, there will be more proposals coming forward. We've got one of the largest home builders in the United States are currently in talks with us for a parcel here in the overlay district. And they're proposing the very same thing, 1- and 2-bedroom unit, rental units at 80%.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Bill?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Selectman Runyon, as you pointed out, we've gotten these affordable units as a result of approving these other massive projects, which only addressed a narrow segment of the marketplace. In my view, rentals aren't always affordable, regardless of what level they're at. But have you looked at an alteration in the multifamily home, single-family home being converted to two-family, for instance, with an A&R approval not required process instead of the whole process that we have in place now, which makes it more difficult for conversion?
The state legislature recently passed a housing choice legislation recently in January, which is going to allow for some zoning changes in all communities, specifically for accessory dwellings. I think that all towns are now required to create a two-family zone or something like that as well. That's something the planning board's going to have to work on and address. And that, when those things happen, having this document available to us, and we're working with MAPC, by the way, who will be conducting the assessment for us, and they believe that could have concluded by the first of the year, and it also coincides nicely with the release of the new census data that just came out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Selectman Runyon.
Any further questions?
Someone motion to approve.
Thank you, Sonia.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Mike? Rob?
Yes.
Brad?
Yes.
Thank you, 11-0. And then we'll move to Article 11, 117 South Bedford Street.
Sure.
Thank you, Selectman Runyon.
Certainly.
So on this article, we were asked to review it through our subcommittee as well. And although there are no financial dollars associated with it at this time, the article is requesting the authority to sell the property at 117 South Bedford under the direction of the select board in order to keep the unit affordable, and then returning the funds upon the sale back to the fund that used the money to, in effect, buy it back. So if you remember, we purchased, the property was in total disarray. We had bad tenants in there. Mike went through a whole, literally, history of what we needed to do in order to get this tenant out The tenant got out, but the property was just ruined.
They weren't tenants though, David, were they? Weren't they the original owners?
The original owners, and then someone else was renting it out as a representative of the owner, and they had tenants in there, and they were coming and going, and it was a mess, right, Mikey?
We've not seen anything like this before. We hope not to see anything like this again. The original owner, Phil, had passed away. This live-in boyfriend just destroyed the place, didn't pay the mortgage, et cetera. It was just it was a complete mess, and then he tried to sell the house. I spotted it on Zillow, and that's when I reached out to Jim Doherty right away, and we put a stop to that. And we
Nice catch.
negotiated, it took a while, it took a year and a half, almost 2 years to get the guy out of there. We negotiated with the lender, we came to
Can't sell what you don't know.
a meeting of the minds, and then we finally got him out, and we got in there, and I just want to add, with a lot of help from a number of Burlington contractors that most of you know, who provided a lot of the services, and we tried to work with other businesses in town for materials, and we were able to actually put that house in better condition today than it was when we bought it. We did asbestos removal, lead paint removal. Everything is brand new from top to bottom. We hope to offer this house to a deserving family we'd like to be in the $290,000 range. We think that'd be a real bargain for some family.
Tanya?
Chairman, if I may, just to kind of put a rainbow on not a good story before this, there's a very good example of great business partners who were helping the town do something.
Indeed. Mhm.
Unbelievable, Mike, because that takes a lot. It would have been an expense, really, that would have been a struggle for the town to do.
We were
easily.
able to do the complete renovations for less than $100 a square foot. That's unheard of.
It's unheard of.
Without the help of the local business community and skilled laborers.
We get great support from our community for a variety of things, and this is just one example of that. It's
Absolutely.
incredible.
Absolutely, and Selectman Runyon, I thank you for that, because the housing stock, like you said, a single family to have for affordable housing is a great opportunity for a family in town. So if all of this is successful, which I hope it would be, right, then when would you envision it would go through the lottery system, I would imagine?
Our consultant is standing by. The house has been ready for some time. Ordinarily, when we get a transfer of property, these deed restricted properties, the process is rather simple. There's a formula we use. The property owner, the owners notify us that they'd like to sell. We have 90 days or so to get that lottery together and find a buyer, and usually it works quite well. But in this instance was completely
Jim, if
different.
I could put a further rainbow, we didn't actually buy those military housing, did we? Wasn't that during your administration, when you were on the board? When we acquired that, that was part of the deal, right? We didn't
Yes,
pay
I mean,
anything for those.
Right, and the beautiful, yes, exactly, Phil, but I think the other nice part too is that this could have readily, if you remember, we unfortunately lost one at one point.
We did.
And this is a great testament to the administration and to you, Selectman Runyon, and Jim Doherty again, who I know isn't on the phone right now, but it really was a save, because that was about to slip by, and it really is a save for a family that's going to be able to buy affordably in Burlington, which is not easy to do.
No, and if we didn't, if we didn't have the help from the folks in the community, we would not have been able to put that house back together and offer it at a price that would be deemed affordable under DHCD guidelines. Just couldn't have done it.
Yeah, so if you wouldn't mind saying to the community who's watching, I mean, how, because I know you're really good at putting, like, on social media, if there was a lottery that's coming up and things like that, what would residents look for? Because it's directly with the town, so would they be?
This one will have a little, we'll have a little bit of time. One hit
Okay.
the market today, one up at,
Right, there's a townhouse.
forget, Richardson Road, okay, came on the market, very little time. So I think the lottery is in October, mid-October, or something like that. This one will have plenty of time to get the word out, get the advertising, allow people to get their pre-qual letters and everything else that they're gonna need to for the lottery. So waiting for town meeting. Hopefully, it's a no-brainer. We want to get our money back, and then we'll get right on the, promoting it and advertising it and getting the word out there to Burlington residents, because it's just this one unit and it's not part of our not part of our inventory. We have a little bit of flexibility in terms of priority lists, so we can give Burlington residents, we're hoping to give veterans or a handicapped family a priority in that, for that house.
One further question, Mr. Chairman. Wouldn't any transfer of that property have, any conveyance of that property been caught at the Register of Deeds?
You would
Don't we have
think
deed
so,
restrictions?
Phil, you would think so, but we've had a couple. We had one of those Richardson Road units, even with the deed restrictions on it, the owner was able to go get an equity loan for $100,000, and then he skipped town. He went back to his country of origin. And we fought for Jim Doherty, thank Jim again and it took us 2 years to settle with the lender who exceeded the amounts allowable on the deed restrictions. So that thing sat empty for almost 2 years, and
But you were able to
association-
recover it because of the deed restriction, right?
the lender lost on that one.
Right.
Yeah, we got it.
Right.
We got it.
Yes, he did.
But, but we did lose the unit for 2 years while all this was being played out.
Well, we didn't lose any money necessarily, but the association
But the-
weren't getting the fees up there.
Well,
The
more
lender
importantly,
was paying
there
it.
was no tenant in there.
This
during
was
that
a for
time.
sale product. This was
Yeah.
a own.
Yeah, it's not a tenant per se, because it's someone's
So the-
ownership.
Well,
The-
home ownership, right, sorry.
Yeah, he got a subordinate mortgage that exceeded the threshold in the deed rider. The original lender was paying, at least paying the property taxes on the place, so. But occasionally, they slip through the cracks, but, and that lender up there on Richardson was a national, lender. It wasn't a fly-by-night outfit, and I don't know how it got past their legal.
Well, I wonder who the conveyance attorney was.
Mr. Chairman, motion to approve.
Thank you, Sonia.
Second.
Thanks, John. All those in favor?
Aye.
Michael?
Yes.
Brad?
Yes.
And Rob?
Yes.
Thank you.
The other yes.
The other, yes, I got them both at once. All right, I think there's one other article, and that's Article 4.
Can I thank you, everybody?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
So there was a little handout on this too that passed around, but I'll start with the background. ARPA that John had spoken about, but ARPA, which is the American Rescue Plan Act, authorizes funding for cities and towns through the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, which included 2 allocations, one directly to the town of Burlington, the other one through our portion through the Middlesex County allotment. Both allotments totaled a little over $8.5 million. So this is money that's being earmarked for the town of Burlington. Spending limitation on these funds, much less restrictive than as we saw through previous COVID-related funding programs. But there are certain categories that this funding can be used for, and other categories that it cannot. So, but the spending is through the administration. So what Article 4 is doing, ultimately, they've committed out of the $8.5 million, right now they're committing to $2 million to be spent. $500,000 has been committed for the engineering services and architectural designs for the Mill Pond Water Treatment Plant. That's what John had spoken about, and that's why that engagement has already taken place. So 500 is going to that. The other 500,000 this year, but there's a 3-year commitment of 1.5 million, 500 a year, is being planned for revenue replacement to help mitigate the effects the pandemic had on our local economy. So what they are doing, which is a budget neutral item, and comes to our Article 4, is to amend the fiscal '22 operating budget as we have seen when we had to offset some of the expenses or remove some of the line items for budgetary items through our operating budget during the crisis. We're basically reinstating those items that we omitted during the last approval round. So again, it is budget neutral, meaning we are taking the 500,000 as an offset to increasing the operating budget by that 500,000. The departments that it's going to were written in that handout, so I won't go through those again. But basically, it was the departments that we saw budget cuts for departments, for personnel, retirements that we didn't rehire. It basically is putting those budget cuts back into place. The other monies, the town administration will keep an eye on and keep us apprised of what the plans are for the costs. I mean, they're looking at, no question, two main components of revenue replacement and water treatment and the water infrastructure projects. So those are the two main sources that they're looking at initially. We have until, I think it's 2026, to actually allocate the funding, and the funding has to be used for approved measures. But this isn't something that's all being spent today. We still have a lot of pieces that this funding may be applied towards, and that's kind of a wait and see. But out of the 8.5 million, 2 million is being earmarked by the administration. We're being asked for the 500,000 to be replaced within the operating budget of the 2022 budget. Subcommittee voted 2-0 in favor.
John?
Just to add a couple things is, the first is that, combating the pandemic is our number one priority, and any costs that come with that. So there is another earmark out of that 8.5 million that we don't have an exact number for it yet, but it could be as high as 7 figures. But that's to cover any costs that come up for COVID now, for the new variant, for whatever. So that was foremost. And the second point I just wanted to make was that there is no real hurry here. We did want to take advantage of being able to add back to some of the positions and add back to the operating budgets of those departments that took a hit last September. It's not fully added back. You may remember that there was 350 cut from the school budget and 350 from the town budget. This is only adding back 250 and 250. And we also wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to phase that in over a couple years, so we don't need $500,000 of additional local receipts to come back in 1 year. We're not creating a structural deficit because we have a few years to wean ourselves off of this revenue replacement. And if for some reason that the revenues skyrocketed back up, we can use this money for something else because we have time. We don't have to spend it right away. The reason we talked about water and sewer is because that is an allowable cost. And when John Sanchez was here, he talked about the SRF, State Revolving Fund. That's one of the requirements in order for you to spend on a project of water and sewer infrastructure. Has to be able to fit into that criteria. So that'll be a big hurdle for us to go through all of that, and we'll know we're not going to have any problems in the audit if we do decide at some point to lower the amount we're going to borrow for either one of those two projects that we approved tonight or something else. So what we talked about with the committee was that's a good catch-all for us to have, that in a couple years when comes time for us to permanently borrow that money and we have a better understanding of what the total costs of the pandemic have been and where we are revenue-wise, then we can make the decision to how much to allocate towards that. And also I'll talk about it when we talk about corona-related funding. This is less restrictive than the first round, and there are 5 that are in the memo. There are 5 categories you can spend in. Within those categories, there are subcategories. So if something comes up from our economic development director or somebody else that does fit in, that's something that we can explore then too. And the reason we're here with Article 4 increasing the operating budget is because the actual mechanics of this, what we want to do is increase the expense side of the operating budget and also increase the revenue side by the same amount and bring those revenues in from that, what is technically a grant. So we were able to do the 500,000 for the design of the PFAS remediation, because it is a grant. It was approved in December and then amended in May, so we actually got half of our direct allotment before June 30th. So we actually had the cash in hand to be able to do that, to sign a contract with the design firm to do the PFAS. So that was the only points I wanted to add. I will make more points when we go over the COVID-related funding, but as far as this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Didn't the school department get earmarked DARPA funds solely for their use?
Yes, yeah, and we can get into specifics for this.
Yeah,
too.
well, so why are you giving them $350,000 out of the town side's money to restore their operating budget when their earmarked funds could be used for that purpose?
So in this latest round of ARP money, there isn't a specific school direct piece of funding.
No, how much money did they get originally in the,
So in
several $1 million, didn't they?
about $2.5 million.
But that wasn't eligible for revenue replacement.
It's
No,
not
it'd be
allowed.
eligible for budget replacement for COVID impact, correct?
It could, but then they run the risk of the same, when we were talking about creating a a structural deficit, is that they're using one-time revenues to fund reoccurring costs. They're gonna run into the same problem a couple of years from now, when that funding is no longer available. We gotta make up for it in the levy.
The operating budget. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Any further questions?
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Sonia.
Steve,
Oh, I'm sorry, didn't see you. Mike?
thanks. David, you mentioned that there was a handout or a attachment or something that details the $500,000 add back to budgets. I'm trying to find that. Can you help me out?
Would you like me to go over them real quick?
Yeah, go ahead. There's a copy in the backup sent to town meeting.
I go over the dollar amount. There was an email that gave the breakdown with an attachment, I think is what you're looking for.
Yes. Maybe.
It's easy enough to go over the breakdown.
Yeah, I could do that quickly if you'd like.
Yeah, go for it, please. Plus, it'll help the viewing audience.
Sure. So the 500,000 made up in two pieces, 250 for the school department, 250 for the town side. The breakdown for the town side is, like we talked about before, it's to add back some of the FTE hours and overtimes to the budgets that were decreased before. Not all of them, but some of them, because we're not doing the same amount of money. It's for the accounting office, it's $30,000, which is a part-time FTE in my office. That was a retirement that we held off on replacing. We'd like to add that back. There's $30,000 for the assessor's line. That is to get the salary line back to where it needs to be to hire a new assessor for when Jim is done. Jim is helping us through contracted services right now. There's $20,000 that was cut from the building department. That is for coverage for hours and overtime within their budget. There's Board of Health, that was a part-time position that was cut, that was added back, but not to the full level. That would really be something like OT for the nurse, for the admin assistants, for do contract tracing and things like that. COA is a portion of a few part-time positions, van drivers, some reception hours, as they bang on the door to come back and get their programs going. We want to be able to be staffed properly. And Youth and Family Services is $15,000. That's partial FTE that was decreased. And there was a retirement and some reshuffling of the grades of the positions. This will give them the opportunity to add that FTE back. That was a decrease. The library was $25,000. That was their weekend hours that were eliminated. As now they're back and up and running and want to be able to add that back. And recreation was $10,000. And that was, basically programs that just didn't run because of COVID, because of either time, participation, whatever. But anybody that's seen what's going on out there is those programs are packed again, and that's a great thing, so. So that's the town side, and the school was $250,000. Oh, I'm sorry, I left one out. There was a position that was eliminated from the treasurer's office that is being added back, but not in the treasurer's office, being added back in town administrator, selectman office, to pick up some of the stuff. So we have multiple retirements happening in that office very soon. And we also have a need for support in that office for the economic development director. There's just more happening in that office with small cell, things that weren't handled in that office before. So that FTE is gonna be transferred up there.
Okay.
I was gonna ask if there were any new, like, net new positions. That last one sounded a little bit like that.
Go ahead, Jess. So it is a different.
It's not net new because it's coming from a position that was unfilled and unbudgeted, Mike. But it is gonna have different job responsibilities and be in a different department.
Okay, so, yeah, so a position was kind of eliminated in one area, and this is creating a new position in another area to offset that from a money point of view, but it's a different position.
Same grade? Same level or grade?
Yes, yep, same position, level and grade added back, same, just different job
different
responsibilities in different office.
Anything further, Mike?
No, that's it, thanks.
John?
Yeah, Mike, just for reference, David sent something yesterday, September 21st at 11 a.m. that has the attachments with some of the breakdown. Has a PowerPoint in there.
Great, thank you.
Frank?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, one of the things that did come up, we asked the question about, what drove the cuts was shortfall in revenue, right? So, this is about another way to get revenue replacement, to try to do some restoration of the cuts we had to make, which we really didn't want to make. The question that we asked was, what's the outlook for, a year, 2, maybe even 3 years out? And it's pretty hard to know. One of the worries that, you shared with us a lot, Phil, and the committee, I think is pretty sympathetic to it, is we really don't know what's gonna happen to things like hotels and office space and restaurants and whatnot as we get out of a pandemic and into a more reformulated, normal way of life. So we don't yet know, I don't think, John, what the revenues are gonna look like in this fiscal year. But and it's too early, it really is. So this plans, goes with the assumptions that we made, uses revenue replacement, basically aid, federal aid, to put some of these cuts back that were kind of draconian. And we'll get a look in another year and in another year on how bad, let's say, how healthy the revenue replacement becomes from organic revenue, from real revenue. And it could be more, it could be less than what we think, we just don't know. Undoubtedly, it's not gonna be of the same construction that it used to be, because it's different kinds of businesses that are gonna come into play. And over the next 2 or 3 years, we'll start to see some of that. What I like about this program is that there's enough money held out that we have the discretion to use as revenue replacement as we need it. And we would use that in such a way that we're not funding an operating budget that's not sustainable when this dries up. So what we have to figure out is, what's the run rate gonna look like in 3 years? And that's probably not a bad window. It's not great, but it's a lot better than what it could have been, which is one of the worries that we had. What if revenues just dry up and they don't come back for 3 years at all? What happens to our operating budget, or what happens to our taxes and all of that? So this is a great mechanism, and I think holding back enough of this, that we have this tool to use for a period of time that lets us measure, lets us get some real input data on what's on the books coming in, like through permitting, through new construction, through run rates on hotels, et cetera. We'll be in a better position to manage our going forward operating budget, if it can grow, or it needs to stay where it is, or it needs to shrink. So I looked at this as a pretty positive, a very positive, in fact, source of money to figure a hard problem. We can all guess, but you're guessing.
And the
Entertain
time,
a motion?
Sonia has a motion, I need a second.
I will second.
Thank you.
All those in favor? Mike?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
And Brad?
Yes.
11-0, thank you.
I just want to mention that Rob and I voted on the 15,000, just keep it in there with library trustees.
Thank you. So now John is going to give us an overview of how the administration is spending the CARES money. And I'm unable to share your presentation.
What's that?
I'm unable to share your presentation on the slide deck on the WebEx.
Oh, okay. Would you rather I go to my desk and share it so they,
Yeah, if you
don't
could.
have screen, or?
Yeah, if you could, that would be,
Okay.
and then that way other people can see it. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, it's
Bye,
not
John.
allowing me
Be right
to
back,
share.
Shway.
Sorry about that. Roger.
Just a quick follow-up to Frank, your comment about, I agree that it's nice to have a pot of money from, this is not the CARES Act, to reuse over the next few years. We're not gonna know a whole lot more before December, when we have to set a guideline for the next year's budget. So I think we're still in kind of tricky territory to figure out what the '23 budget looks like, or, what we should target. But we will know some more by December, when we usually have that discussion.
Right, right. The bigger problem is, where is our commercial tax base really going? It's changing, we know that. What it will net us is hard to guess. Optimistically, with a lot of these new kinds of businesses that could come in through economic development and new stuff coming in, maybe in 3 to 5 years, it could be bigger than it ever was. You just don't know.
Well, I wanted to ask Jim Doherty that question. When is the cutoff for the abatement request for this fiscal year?
John may know.
Yeah.
We haven't even set the tax rate yet, right?
Well, we have for fiscal '21.
Oh, right. So when do the abatements expire for that?
Right. And what is on the books currently for abatements? What will be coming in '22?
Well, the tax rate hasn't been set, right? Usually it's set till.
But we're in fiscal,
We're spending the money, right?
Right.
we're in fiscal '21, that's right.
No, we're in 22 now.
We're in '22.
Fiscal
Right, so,
'22.
but
yeah.
so the tax rate has been set for 21.
Right, so there
which
are
is-
abatement requests on deck
Right,
currently.
For-
But the big ones, I think, will be in fiscal
22,
'23,
23.
when they have a full year of experience.
Okay, John.
Has my screen been shared?
Yeah, your screen is sharing.
Okay,
Does it get bigger? No, it's probably all right.
thank you. So, Chairman Warren had asked me to just put together some slides and give an idea of what types of and amount of COVID-related funding has the town received to date. So I just want to go over that really quick. Really, with COVID-related funding, there's two major funding sources. And the first we talked a little bit about was the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Securities Act, or CARES Act. We've all heard a lot about CARES. It's been around. It was passed almost immediately. It was great. It was timely. It provided fast, direct payments to cover the initial costs of the pandemic. But it was a little bit restrictive with the spending eligibilities and the timing limitations on it. It was the CARES Act basically had three basic eligible spending requirements. The cost must be directly related to COVID, to the pandemic. You have to be able to have a narrative that explains why it's related to the COVID. They would have had to have been unbudgeted as of March 27th, 2020, the date of the declaration of emergency in Massachusetts. And also, you must have the beneficial use, which was originally last December, which was then extended to this October. So CARES Act expires next month. Second major source of funding we talked a little bit about earlier is ARPA. So it's referred to as ARPA or ARP. It's the American Rescue Plan Act. This passed last December. This was the product of municipalities beating the drum to ask for the next round of, people were calling stimulus funding at the time, but the next round of COVID-related funding to be allowable to be used on revenue replacement, which most of us was the biggest hit we took, especially here in Burlington. So when ARPA was passed, broadened the spending requirements and lengthened the time limitations that were in it. ARPA has 5 basic eligibility categories. They were in the memo we talked about earlier, and we talked about them earlier, but it's to support the health, support the public health expenditures, to address negative impacts caused by the health emergency, to replace public sector revenue, to provide premium pay for essential workers, and to invest in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. One additional piece of ARPA that was that we talked a little bit about is the major benefit is that it's multiple years. It can be used in this year, next 3 years, and part of the year after that. So it gives you the time to wean yourself off of these revenues, which is a huge plus for us. So with the town side, town direct COVID-related funding for CARES Act, the town's coronavirus relief fund, the municipal program, so which is commonly referred to as CVRF. There's 2 pieces of that. There's a municipal program and a school program. For the municipal program, Burlington's allocation was $2.5 million. This is the money that expires next month. This was the money that was a reimbursable program. This had the requirements, the limited spending requirements, and that totaled $2.5 million. The second batch of funding, which we talked about with ARPA, was the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, also referred to as SLFRF. This was also in the memo. This is ARPA that has 2 pieces, one that comes directly to the municipality. That allocation for us was just under $3 million. The one that goes through the Middlesex County, because most of the country is run on county systems, and Northeast doesn't really like that. So Middlesex County is just acting as a pass-through, and that total allocation is $5.5 million, for a total of just over $8.5 million. The way that money isn't a reimbursable program per se. We got half of both of those allotments already sent to us, and we'll get the second half of them next year. They were really good about not causing cash flow problem for towns that are looking to spend this on bigger projects. They don't want to cause anybody cash flow problem where they have to wait till the end of the program to get the money. So there was another huge benefit of this. Some of the other town COVID-related funding that was received was there was $270,000 received for to extend the granite curbs along Terrace Hall. This was the Shared Streets program for $270,000. There was a CDBG program where Burlington and Bedford received over $320,000 for a job training program. Burlington Fire had a receipt for some exercise equipment through an assistance to firefighter grant, and the clerk's office was reimbursed for some of the additional costs for running election during COVID. We talked about the school direct. This is money that went directly through the school through grants. The coronavirus relief fund program, the school program, we talked CVRF as a municipal program and a school program. This was $789,000. This was something that came out right away, and it was basically for schools to be able to open up and get kids back in school. And it also had to do with putting in a remote learning program back when schools first closed. Not every school was ready or capable, or probably most schools weren't ready or capable of doing that. State Coronavirus Prevention Fund program was from the summer of 20, when we were going back into the schools a year ago. Then there was what's commonly referred to as ESSER. That's the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. There's three sections of that, 3 years worth of it. So there was the first ESSER of 112, you can see, then a second one of 409 and 898 is the last amount. Benefit of ESSER is that those can be spent over multiple years also. And then the final thing, within ARP, there was a small addition to the schools get what's an IDEA grant. This is a special ed grant for individuals with disabilities. And they supplemented those grants by an additional amount for both the K-12 portion and the preschool portion that each school district already gets. So that total is quite a big number. Is 11.7 million townwide and 2.5 million directly to the schools. And like I talked about, luckily we're lucky that the benefit of the good portion of that will be able to be used over the following years. That's it for the slides, Mr. Chairman. Would you like me to come back in the room or stay on my here?
No, you can come back. I didn't want to banish you. I've been informed that Mr. Eiler has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this is sort of a more general question, I guess. You know, we just, there's an article for town meeting to approve the increase in 500K to the operating budget, being offset by the federal grants. So what I'm trying to understand is what sort of grants require us to, us being town meeting, to approve an increase in the operating budget versus other grants that are seemingly operation-related things where town meeting doesn't vote on them?
Sure. So the actual law, I think, is chapter 4453A, I believe. And the reason that Article 4 is the way it is because we're going to bring it in as revenue and increase an operating budget for a school with that revenue. So that's why that's in front of town meeting to be approved, because we're increasing operating budgets. If we were going to spend it all on one-time funding, technically we wouldn't have to, we wouldn't need town meeting approval to do that, and neither the school. However, I guess we probably would give a report of what we were planning on spending the money for. But because we're increasing an operating budget for a department, that's why it needs town meeting approval.
So that sort of begs the question. Not to pick on them, it's just the one I happen to be thinking of. I know the Council of Aging had a grant that funded van drivers for a number of years. But that wasn't considered part of the operating budget, even though it's virtually indistinguishable from anything else they do from year to year. So how is that decided not to be an operating budget thing versus
Source of funds.
something
Yeah,
else?
so it is plainly the source of funds where it comes from. But I think with those things that are used every year to fund operating budget things, when we present our budget, we put them in as an offset. So we put we show the line that says this is what this line costs, but we're also paying $30,000 of it out of that grant or something like that. So at least it identifies that we are counting on it, because if that grant were to go away.
But that's nothing that town meeting ever approved, per se. That grant money was just offset against an expense without town meeting saying one way or the other So I'm trying to understand, how is that different than?
They approve the budget with the acknowledgement that some of the funding comes from a grant.
Well, they approved a budget that effectively didn't include that item because it was paid for by something else. So it wasn't in the budget.
No, it was in the budget.
Yeah,
It's in the budget, but it's itemized as an offset. I have a more pointed question. Who does approve all those other expenditures?
Yeah, the grant approval process, exactly. Who approves this?
So do the select, for example, do the selectmen have to vote on spending the SRF money?
So the chief executive of the town and then the school committee have to vote to accept the money, is what the requirement is.
Oh, wow, so there's really no accountability. Sorry, did I say that out loud?
No, that's really what I'm getting at.
I'm sorry, the accountability is to the chief executive.
I mean, this came up in the context of schools also. There, again, I'm not suggesting I was trying to cover up anything, because they weren't. But in looking through hundreds of pages of documents, we keep coming across line items, this wasn't in the budget because it's offset by this. And so you end up having all these grants that, as you say, what was the real approval process?
And fulfilled FTEs, new FTEs.
Yes,
With
yes.
no approval process.
Well, I would just add to that, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman.
No, go.
When the budgets are approved through Ways and Means and with the subcommittees, those departments that are relying on a grant to pay for an FTE or a reoccurring cost year in and year out are listed. The FTE is listed in the grant at their salary, and then the offset is when you're budgeting it. So in our mind, it's, this is everybody we're funding, but this isn't in the tax levy.
But
It's
is
from a different revenue source.
Is the
So-
grant also covering all the, not just the salary, but all the benefits that go along with it? Or is the town covering that in terms of the allocation?
As far as I know, we don't charge any grants for,
Yeah.
It's just straight
Many
salaries?
times,
There's a long tail on
I
it.
don't think the grants fund their own benefits.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a very long tail on the expenses.
So the town needs that cost, Roger?
So I think we've seen this actually in grants for decades, right? You know, the police department gets a grant for something and they bought a new van or some improvement. Council on Aging gets a grant for something and the money goes directly to them, well, through the treasurer's office.
It wasn't $8 million.
And then they spend it, right? So the grants and external funding of things has been, that's one of the ways we operate. That's how extra things get done.
I don't think it's a
This
change
SRF
per se, it's just some of these things are multi-year things, which, so to distinguish between operating budget versus one-time thing when it's multi-year becomes a very fuzzy concept.
Yes, and then, the size of this pile of money for COVID-related and the CARES Act, et cetera, and IDEA, it's big enough that it looks like an attractive nuisance, some accounting level.
But anyway, I'd like to thank
Embarrassment of riches.
you for actually bringing it to town meetings so that it can be discussed.
Inevitably, what happens is that which began as a grant suddenly becomes a FTE on the tax rate.
Yes.
We've been very aware of that. We keep that in mind.
Yes.
But, I mean, it is nice to have money that our taxpayers do not have to supply. And I'm sure they all appreciate it. Yeah, so, indirectly, anyway.
And there is some accountability, oh, sorry, Sonia.
No, that's okay. Just so that we're clear, so we don't confuse those watching, although I'd like to think people are still watching. That's what I'm, it's kind of like really just for this room to talk about. Yeah.
Patty's watching anymore.
But I think Roger said it too. It's not new that a grant, that we talk about when Marge, for example, when she comes in with Council on Aging, we talk about the FTE and where that money is coming from. And then we always talk about in those budget meetings the fact that, the insurance and the other benefits are not covered within that, so the town is kind of absorbing that. I think because this is a number, that's the question, but it is not uncommon for the executive board to be addressing certain things that
No,
are
it's
not
certainly
within
not
the
new, I agree.
budget, yeah. And so I just want to make sure, because I know we kind of know that, but if one person is watching and thinks that, the executive committee or the administration has authority over certain things new that hasn't happened, that's been years and years and years, yeah. Okay, that was just my,
Do you accept a motion? Or we?
I don't think there needs to be.
there's no vote on that, right?
That's one more
Yes.
question, John.
Roger?
So presumably, there's actually some accounting, there's actually money goes in and out of various accounts and people get paid, and so there is a paper trail.
Correct.
Sorry, electronic trail.
Yep.
And I guess with the CARES Act, there are actually reporting requirements.
Yes.
Which sound like they're either gone with the newer, with the SRF, the newer act, or vastly reduced, right?
Well, reporting requirements aren't gonna be any less. There's still gonna be extensive requirements, plus
eligibility.
audit, plus all of that stuff. It just broadened what was allowable to spend
All right,
money.
so there is a full accounting, and the people who are saying, gave us the money, want to know how we spend it. And there's layers of, like you said, auditing, so it's not completely discretionary.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, the smart thing to do is to use this for lost revenue offsets, and to use it in hopes of the revenue coming back. And over the horizon of, call it 3 years, you know it's not gonna come back, then you've gotta start planning accordingly to either have a higher tax rate or a smaller operating budget. The other piece of this, though, that that we are taking advantage of, that's a huge benefit, is major projects that are eligible. So we're very lucky that we've got a couple that are in the, many millions of dollars. And so the smart thing to do is to get your debt down. Don't get yourself too screwed up on operating expenses that you can't replace, and get through the program, getting infrastructure worked on and lowering your debt, which, by the way, does give you some relief in your operating budget if you, in fact, do that. Right? Unfortunately, the interest rates are pretty low on debt, but debt is debt, so,
Time being.
we had that discussion. You can never make money with debt.
I think Mike may have a question. I see his hand up. I don't know if that's from previous time.
That's from before.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure, because I missed it the last time. Okay, so the only thing we have left on the agenda for tonight is the minutes. And there was a correction from,
Thank you.
thank you, John. And there was a correction from the meeting I sent, or the minutes I sent out from this, in the attachment to tonight, and it was just attendance. Rob was present and Brad was not, and I reversed the two, otherwise they're the same. Frank?
So one other thing, the water main that blew up was actually on the intersection of Network Drive and the Middlesex Turnpike. It was at 5th something or other, if anyone cares.
Do we have, I don't think we have a fifth, do we?
No, we
I
don't.
always
We
have
have
a
a
5th.
fourth, but I don't think we have a
There's
fifth.
no fifth.
Okay. I noted that. Chair will entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Roger. All those in favor?
Aye.
Mike?
Was I there?
Yes.
Brad? Brad?
Yes.
Thanks. And then Roger? Rob, sorry. I'm tired now.
Over there.
Roger's over here. Okay, that's 11.
Who's on first, Mr. Chairman?
Oh, yeah.
I'm an abstention.
Would you like a motion to
Yep.
adjourn?
No, I want to stay here for a while. So that's 9:02.
There's a better place to stay.
Yeah, I agree. I'll accept your motion, Frank.
Motion to adjourn.
Aye. That concludes tonight's meeting. Thank you, Chris. Thanks, everyone.